the working class was denied the benefits of education. That was the most, I think that was a more important marker of difference in 19th century into early 20th century England between the working class and the middle class. But then came universal schooling and the welfare state, and that evened out to some extent, not to the full extent, I'll come back to that, that evened out to some extent. Once you have universal schooling and universal education, it softens the distinction between those who are educated and those who are unlettered. And that is what has happened in most countries in the Western world. It is not something that has happened in India as yet. It has not happened in India as yet. And it will take some time for it to happen. It will take some time for it to happen, and that is why I think the middle class is still a very noticeable feature in the Indian social order. I think the middle class, all of us here belong to the middle class. You just have to go across the river Jamuna and you will find other residents of Delhi who don't belong to the middle class. You won't find many representatives of people who live across the Jamuna, people who are manual workers, people who are laborers, people who come to the city for casual labor. You won't find them sitting here. Now, but this will be softened. I have no doubt that this will be softened with the spread of education, and education is spreading. Education is spreading, and the NUPA, the National University of Educational Planning and Administration, put together a book called Who Goes to School? Who Goes to School? And they asked me to write a foreword to that book. I was involved with the project whose outcome the book was. So Professor Govinda, who's the Vice-Chancellor of the university and the architect of that survey, asked me to write a foreword. And it's a rather optimistic projection. The book presents a rather... Who Goes to School says that there are still people out of school now, but we are moving steadily, if not very rapidly, towards a stage when everybody will go to school. And that is probably true, and it will almost certainly come about. But then that is not the end of the question, because it raises another question. Everybody will go to school, but will they all go to the same kind of school? Will they all go to the same kind of school? I think schools are very highly differentiated. And if you get into a certain kind of school, or if you manage to put your children into a certain kind of school, you can hope that you will then get into St. Stephen's College or into the IIT. But if you don't manage to do that, the task of moving further educationally and occupationally becomes more and more difficult. So I ask myself, are we really going to move to a stage where everybody will not only go to school, but everybody will go to the same kind of school, which will equip him with the same kind of education as everybody else? I'm not very confident or optimistic that this will happen. I don't think so. There's a great English novelist and satirist called Evelyn Waugh of the previous generation. And his first book is called Decline and Fall. It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book as an examination or as a representation of the class structure of English society. So there's a man called Paul Pennyworth. Doesn't have much money. He goes to Oxford. This is in the late 20s. He goes to Oxford, and he, for no fault of his, he's expelled from Oxford. Some other people are playing a prank, and he gets caught in the middle of it, so he has to leave. So what does he do? Young man of good family, but not much wealth, is expelled from Oxford. So he starts looking for a job as a school teacher. And in England, according to Waugh, this is a satire, everything is organized. So there are agencies which will find you a job as a school teacher. So Paul Pennyworth goes to such an agency, and the agent looks him up and down and realizes this man well, he might become a school teacher, but he's not going to get a job in a good school. So he's not very interested. So he looks at him and says, well, you want employment in a school. Let me see. He rummages through his files and he says, well, there are two possibilities. There are two institutions, but I'm afraid they are just school. So Paul Pennyworth says, school, yes, that's fine. That's what I've come here for. And the agent says, young man, you don't seem to understand that in this country, in England, we classify schools into various categories. First of all, you have what is called leading school. Then you have what is called first-rate school. Then you have what is called good school. And finally, you have school. And the agent explains very helpfully, school, I'm afraid, is pretty bad, but that's all you are likely to get to. Now, I think that there are lots of Indians. I mean, I've been associated with one of the leading schools in Delhi. I was the chairman of Springdale School, and I know how people strive and struggle to get their children. And this is a middle-class obsession which is stronger in India than with the Indian middle class than it is with the middle class in Western countries. They want to put their sons, particularly their sons, but now even their daughters, not just into a good school, but to the best school. The best school. The good school is not good enough for them. They want to get the, and they're so knowledgeable, so well informed. Middle class mothers and middle class fathers in Delhi and in Calcutta, I'm sure it's the same. Now, everybody can't get into the best school. So there must be some who get into schools which are ordinary, which are not all the way, where they don't get a very adequate preparation for a career and a profession. They can get into, but still, I think that something will happen, is happening with the expansion of education and the expansion of schools. There still will be many very bad schools, but my view is that a society which offers opportunities to parents to put their children into schools, even if they're bad schools, is better than a society which doesn't provide those opportunities. And we tend to believe that it's only in India that we have third-rate and fourth-rate schools. This is not true at all. I have a daughter who is an economist and now has, for my sins, ended up as an economist in the World Bank. She did a PhD from Stanford on education and on a very interesting subject. Her subject was teacher absenteeism. Teacher absenteeism, teachers. And you know, she had been trained in mathematical analysis and all the rest of it. And she was working. So I said, when she would discuss this with me, I said, look, her name is Tara. I said, look, Tara, I'm not interested in these statistics of teacher absenteeism. What I want to know is, have you found out what teachers do when they're present in school? Not when they're absent. So, and you know, as our conversation progressed, I said, I could write 2 PhD theses on teacher absenteeism in Delhi's colleges. I have enough data to be able to do that. But despite all of this, I think that we are moving ahead. I do not believe, Dr. Jadhav, that any society, the United States, and the point I wanted to make is that the school situation is by no means all that rosy in the United States. Schools in the United States do not compare in quality with schools in Europe. They do not. They have very good schools, but many schools in the United States are very bad indeed, and there is an enormous amount of cheating and skullduggery in many respects. They inflate their grades. They inflate their grades so that the inspectors will see that this school is performing well. So every student is given an A grade. Then there is a racket in the textbook industry. There's a great physicist called Richard Feynman. He was one of the great, he was a Nobel laureate, but much more than a Nobel laureate. And he was an eccentric. He decided at a certain time that he would go into the question of how physics was taught in schools. So he started looking at school textbooks, and he was appalled. He was appalled by what he found, the kind of nexus between producers of textbooks, school boards, school teachers. I mean, those of you who are pessimistic about Indian schooling should read Richard Feynman's book. It's called Surely You Are Joking, Mr. Feynman. And you would find that, well, things may be pretty bad here, but they're pretty bad in other countries as well. I don't know whether that would be a great consolation for you. I think that what schooling and the expansion of schooling is doing in India is not that it will eliminate inequality. I don't think that's going to happen. But it will open up opportunities for individual mobility. Bright students who go to school will, if they're really bright, if they try very hard, they will be able to enter institutions of higher education from which they, and this happens in curious ways. You know, this happens in curious ways. I have a student who is an Englishman who's been my student for more than 40 years now. He's now retired from the London School of Economics as Professor of Anthropology. He's now going to be 70 this year. He started as a very young man in the mid-60s as a PhD student and under my supervision. And he has been studying the Béteille steel plant. And he explained to me something that I hadn't really appreciated. That is the mass of casual, unorganized labor on the one side, and those who have a proper job in Béteille steel plant. He said for every 10 persons who have a proper job in Béteille steel plant, there are dozens who are waiting outside doing casual labor in the hope that they will be able to get a proper job. And he said they are very conscious of this distinction, and they describe it as the distinction between Naukri and Kaam. Kaam is something that you do. Naukri, once you have got Naukri in the Béteille steel plant or in any public sector plant, if you have children who are bright, who are keen, who are eager, then they can get anywhere. They can get anywhere. He gives the examples of people, sons of manual workers, who, because of the schooling facilities that the Béteille steel plant makes available, get into the IITs. In that sense, they have better opportunities for upward mobility than college lecturers in some Mufassir town. So these are various ways in which reading, writing are spreading and opportunities for individual mobility are growing. What I wanted to say is that reading and writing opens up opportunities for individual mobility. Then it is left to the individual to decide what he will do with those opportunities. It does not solve every possible problem. It's not a magic bullet which solves the problem of inequality. It does not lead to the elimination of inequality, but it certainly does to the opening up of opportunities for individual mobility. And that, I think, is a very welcome development. Thank you.